Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my channel for another INART 1/6 scale figure unboxing and review. Today, we're taking an early look at a pre-production sample version of Great Sage Armor Wukong from Black Myth Wukong. I've popped a link to INART's website in the description if you're looking to pre-order this, along with the discount code JUSTIN for 5% off your order. While you're down in the description, why not hit that subscribe, bell notification icon, and join button, so you're notified as soon as brand new Wukong content goes live on the channel. As for the box art, we're not going to spend overly long on it, just in case this is not the final look for the box. Being a pre-production sample, I doubt everything is locked just yet. Even the shape and size of the box might be subject to change. In the middle up front, some silver and gold foil logos, then these glossy patterns top and bottom, with the rest of the box, the black background, being done in a satin/soft touch rubberized finish. This video is brought to you by JustinsCollection.shop, the home of the figure first aid kit, as well as other accessories to help your collection be the best it can be. The first aid kit contains multiple tools to help you with maintenance, styling rooted hair, and much more. We also sell crotch grabbers, soft rubber tips to prevent damage, and they're compatible with most modern Hot Toys base molds. Acrylic risers come in multi-packs, they're optically clear, thick and sturdy, and stackable. Check out the link to JustinsCollection.shop in the description. Then on the bottom of the box, not around the back, warnings and legal information. What is around the back? More of those glossy patterns, then in the middle, Black Myth Wukong. Done in gold foil. Nice and shiny. So far, not much art on the box art, really. But we're about to change all that. Flipping open this top flap, held in place with magnets, as you unfurl it, you reveal an almost full-size scroll on the underside of it. This reminds me of the scrolls that you see when you're transitioning between chapters in the game, and if that's the vibe they were going for, they nailed it. That's Wukong, and if I had to guess, that's probably the Celestial Court. And Wukong being Wukong, he's very likely up to no good. First in-hand impressions for Great Sage Armor Wukong. Surprisingly heavy, and I can already tell this armor is chock full of detail. I can't wait to get stuck into it, but what we're going to do now is get all of his accessories laid out in the light box and take a closer look at everything he comes with. Starting off with the display base first. Initially, I thought that this was meant to be from Chapter 5, but if you know anything about Chapter 5 of the game, there's very little green in that area, and there's some green airbrush shading on the top of this base, so I'm going to say that this is probably from Chapter 6, now that I'm looking at it closer. Sculpt work, I love the organic flow for the rock work around the front, then some more traditional spiky rocks at the back, and they've integrated some interesting features into this base. No magnets, but you can remove this rock and instead go with a crotch grabber. And this, being an all-new design in art, I'm interested to see where they go with this in the future. It's an industrial-feeling crotch grabber. There's this real metal knurled knob up top that you have to unscrew. Then you can extend it up, rubber tips at the front of it, so no worries about damage, and it's height adjustable. I reckon I'm probably going to go without it, just because it's this bright chrome silver thing, versus their first version of Wukong, they didn't use something like this. Instead, there was an ankle grabber. I prefer that. If I had to choose between invisible ankle grabbers that are still just as secure as crotch grabbers or this, that's what I'd be going with. Don't hear what I'm not saying, it's still preferable to the magnet system. That, in theory, was perfect. If it was 100% flawless, figures, they would be just seamlessly standing on the base with no ugly grabbers. But they struggled to implement that. Therefore, crotch grabbers, for now, it shows that they're listening, and they realize that people don't want their figures toppling over in their collections for the sake of aesthetics. But this right here, the back big rock in this crevice, is removable so that you can grab Wukong's staff, insert it into the base, giving it a turn to lock it in there. Now he can be perched on top of it. That is brilliant. And it goes in deep enough that it's pretty secure. You might have to work with it, get the angle just right, but balancing him on the staff on the base should be doable. I'm so freaking keen to install this on him. We'll save it for later. This is his headdress. The feathers are gigantic, the way they curl around like that. And the sculpt work and paint apps, they're very impressive. There's a green wash over the gold paint to make that look aged and worn. And check out how shiny these metallic silver bits are. Even the red sections have some airbrush shading on them. For those wondering, it attaches with a magnet and a key system. You'll see what I mean. This tassel, soft plastic, it's an asymmetrical sculpt with beads at different heights. This attaches to the underside of his chin. It goes along with that headdress. Ah yes, the gourd. You drink from this in-game to heal yourself. Sometimes it has other benefits, like it gives you some mana back or poisons you, depending on which armor set you have equipped and what soaks and wines you went with. Sculpt work for the net. This is sculpted, not an actual net. It's raised on the surface. There's washes in the crevices. Brown for the main body. There's this tie up top and a real string that you can sort of loop around his belt and attach this to him. I really wish we got this with the first version of Wukong. It's the miniature version of his staff that he pulls out of his ear because that's where he keeps it. It's tiny. You can still tell there's a lot of sculpted detail on it, and the gold paint applications are suitably shiny. The benefit of getting it now, if you have the first Wukong though, is you could always potentially use this and the hand that goes along with it with that Wukong figure. The wrist pegs, perfectly compatible across both releases. It's not actually meant to be worn by him. This is just a handheld accessory or some set dressing. It's Wukong's crown, soft plastic, shiny metallic gold, and a black wash. Coming from someone who owns the first Wukong, I didn't think the staff could get any larger. But here comes INART proving me wrong. You versus the guy she tells you not to worry about. I like the original staff, but there's no denying that the new one is just nicer, with the sculpted dragons and other bits and pieces up top, the metallic gold paint apps, the sculpted lettering, and there's even some hairline scratches on the surface. They're not overly chonky, like the detail work was with the original staff. Once again, I like the OG, but if I had to pick between them, I'm going with the new one. And lastly, a full array of hands. Skin texture, some shading, fully painted fingernails. They stick out past the fingers themselves, but I don't think they're going to break. They're a little bit soft. Sculpted fur, airbrush shading for the edges, and a lighter dry brush over the top to highlight that fur texture. These hands, they're open palm ones, they're meant to be paired up with the gourd. 2 gripping hands for the staff. The fingers are pretty rigid. I would suggest heating these hands up first, then popping the staff in there. 2 relaxed open palm hands already installed on him right out of the box, and there's detail with skin texture and wrinkling on the inside of them. This one is for the I'm pulling the staff out of my ear pose. There's a gap right there for you to insert the mini staff into, but that seam is quite ugly. I'm hoping for the final production version, they figure out how to do away with it. Only 1 fingers curled in gripping hand for the left side. The right one would have been nice. The same thing with the 2-finger pointing hand, only for the left side. Then with this one too, only for the left side. Thumb in, fingers out. You can use this, pop it on his forehead to make it look like he's peering out over the distance as he's posed on the top of his staff. What we're going to do now is get Wukong in his Great Sage armor himself out here. Standing straight up and down in the light box, no crazy poses or accessories or anything like that. I don't think I've ever used this adjective to describe a figure before now that I think about it, but the piece rotating around in front of me is breathtaking. Let it just simmer for a second. all of the detail, the layering with the armor, how shiny those bits are, the head sculpt, the proportions, the lack of any visible seam lines. This doesn't even read as though it's a 1/6 scale figure. It looks like the model turning around in-game. That's the highest level of praise I could possibly give it. Is it 100% perfect? No. Couple of things we need to discuss, and we will. But for right now, color me impressed. For a pre-production sample, this thing is punching way above its weight class, which is a very good sign for the final version. Up close and personal, holy shit, that's an incredible head sculpt. It literally looks like I'm holding the video game model in my hands right now. That's how accurate this head sculpt is. Now, the elephant out of the room right off the bat, INART is known for rooted hair. Is this rooted or sculpted? You already know the answer. This is sculpted PVC plastic. Am I okay with that? Yes, because the only fur you can even see is on the hands and the head sculpt. Plus, they needed the hair to be sculpted so that you could do the swap out gimmick for the headdress. We'll get stuck into that in just a second. The other question is it the same head sculpt as their first Wukong release? Surprisingly, no. The hair is a lot wilder with the new one. There's more of it. This ugly seam underneath his ear is now gone, thank goodness. And the way it's been painted makes Wukong look a little bit older. Which tells me that this is meant to be actual Wukong, and this is the destined one. At least, that's how I see it. Now, the mechanism to attach the head sculpt for the body works in the exact same way as the original. It's on a cylindrical neck connector, so you can height adjust it up and down, depending on the pose you want to go for, and what proportions you're after. If you like him looking bulkier, push it all the way down. If you want him to have a longer neck, also doable. Oh, and speaking of the neck, there's skin texture, sculpted and painted, and a little bit of fur poking out from underneath his collar. I mean, the detail for the skin part of the face is crazy. That green paint app on his upper lip that looks like there's hair or fur underneath his skin, that cannot have been easy to do, especially when the face you have to work with is so small with all this fur around it. It must be green paint underneath skin tone paint, and that's what gives it that subtle level of translucency. The furrowed brow look makes him look very mean, especially with a head tilt forward, and he's still got moving eyes just like the original one. To get to them, you just take off the head sculpt. You can either use the tool or your finger. There's plenty of access inside the sculpt. I've been dying to try it some side-eye with this head sculpt because of the intense furrowed brow. It's going to make him look so freaking fierce, and yeah, 100% of the time, this sculpt is going to be rocking some side-eye. Let's pop the head back on the body and do some rapid-fire eye position tests. See what works best with this head sculpt. See what I mean? Head tilt forward, eyes looking up through his furrowed brow, perfect expression, and perfect eye position to bring this head sculpt to life. He's giving you that, don't you test me, because I will kick your ass sort of look. Just as good looking to the other side. As long as you're combining this eye position with a head tilt, you're pretty much set. And it's worth noting that the range of motion for the ball joints for the eyes is very good, almost completely unrestricted. You know how sometimes you have a figure with moving eyes and you try and move them off to the side, but they bump into the plastic inside the head sculpt and they just won't go far enough? Not an issue with this piece. Even this I kind of like, and I never rock figures with their eyes looking down because it usually just doesn't work for them. But with Wukong, I'm tempted. Okay, back to stock. Can you use the other Wukong head sculpt on this body? Say you own both of them and you don't want this to be Wukong, you prefer this to be the destined one, you want to do a head swap with the Ebon Gold armor set, 100% compatible. This head sculpt is a little bit larger in scale, so it looks slightly big on the body, doesn't ruin it for me, something to be aware of. Back to the head sculpt that comes on the body. There's one more thing that we need to try out with the sculpt. Then we can talk about all of this stuff. And I can't wait to do that. But up here, this top hairpiece is removable. It's held in place with a magnet and a key. They've cleverly disguised the seam for it inside the jagged sculpt work for the hair, so you can't even really see it. It looks entirely seamless when it's installed. Then when you connect up the headdress, it sits underneath the hair strands and it looks properly integrated. Before we can discuss it, I need to install the little tie underneath his chin to complete the look. I just can't get over the size of these feathers. It's crazy. But now that the tassel is installed, it's PVC plastic. If it happens to collide with the chest armor during posing, it shouldn't break on you. It's nice and soft. And it keys in securely on the underside of his chin inside the head sculpt. The top part of the headdress, so much detail. There's sculpt work, little bits and pieces sticking off the main bulk of it, like the horns for the dragon. All PVC plastic, very durable. The gold paint apps make it nice and shiny. Then the feathers, individual strands, they're all sculpted in. There's some feathering, some airbrush shading, I'm so sorry. They're soft plastic, you can heat them up and reshape them. Out of the box, they were more vertical, but to be game accurate, you need to curl them in. So that's what I did, and now this is my permanent display option for him. But he's going to be pretty difficult to handle on camera for the rest of this segment, so let's reinstall the hairpiece and take this piece off, then we can go from there. Now that that's done, let's talk about the body underneath the outfit. Proportions? Tick from me, he can get his arms completely flushed down by his sides, and there's a port around the back for the tail. We're about to install it. But if I had to guess, this body is probably the same, if not a slightly modified version of their first Wukong body. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Proportions were already good with the first one, and articulation was as well. Plus, it's entirely covered by armor, so you don't need to sculpt any new parts and pieces with any extra detail. The only real skin on the body that's visible is the neck, and even that is only a teeny tiny little bit up top. Installing the tail is so easy. There's a port underneath the skirt pieces. Right there you can see it, and it's keyed so the tail only goes in one way. When you push it in, make sure you give it an extra push to make sure it's seated properly. Now that the tail's installed, slot the skirt pieces underneath it so that nothing is colliding. The only complaint I have with the tail is I wish it was on a ball joint, and maybe they could have given us a wired one so that we could have moved it around during posing. As it stands, it's a static piece, you plug it in and leave it alone. To get this much surface detail, this intricate sculpt work on the armor, the leather grain effect, the mottled metal look for that panel right there, all of the crevices that they can sink a wash into, these armor plates had to be sculpted plastic. Will that limit articulation? Surprisingly, not as much as I was expecting. You'll see in the articulation segment. But yes, a little. Some of these tassels are real string, they're actually tied up, whereas other ones, like around the front, these bits, even the ones around the back, they're sculpted plastic. The armor is shiny enough. Light does gleam off the surface, you can see how reflective it is, but it's not like a mirror finish. It looks like aged, patinaed metal, and that has to be the look they were going for because it's game accurate. There's little dragons and flowers and other mythical creatures integrated into this armor. I use it in the game now that I've unlocked it, but I haven't spent that much time looking at all the intricate details, and there is so much to digest here. But it's worth noting that they've made improvements since they sent me this pre-production sample. This is not the one that they showed pictures of recently with the new detail on the underside of the skirt pieces and extra tassels and whatnot. They may even make more changes before this outfit is final. even when it was at this stage, it was impressive. The layering effect, the way that's been sculpted so it looks like it's folded over itself, but it isn't, it's just one piece of sculpted plastic, very clever. The tassels down below, they're all soft, they're not going to break. And for the pants underneath the skirt, there's dragons and other patterns, that's all gold screen printing. But it's not like raised screen printing, if you know what I mean. It's one with the surface. It lets the baggy, breathable fabric do its own thing. This is going to be great to work with for posing. And I've just now noticed there's a little pattern behind the gold patterns on the surface of the fabric. Then this red main skirt piece, that's screen printed, and it's so thin, even though it's folded over itself to make up these pleats, it doesn't look bulky, it sits flat and doesn't push up on these front skirt pieces, the PVC plastic ones. The shin armor, I can't call them boot guards because he doesn't have any boots on. His feet are exposed. There's fabric ties, and then this piece over the top, the sculpted dragon head, the buckle, leather grain texture, the gold, and all of the deep sculpt work that has just drunk up that black wash, and everything is popping. Now the feet. They're slightly different versus the original Wukong figure's feet. The sculpt work is the same. The paint applications for the skin, almost the same. There's maybe a bit more shading. But they've painted toenails. I'm now wondering why they didn't do that the first time round, and that was one of my complaints with that piece. There's sculpted detail on the underside, but a bit of an ugly seam line. For a quick side-by-side comparison, two very different looking versions of technically kind of the same character. We've got the Great Sage armor set for Wukong on the left, and the Ebon Gold armor set on the right. I see it as Wukong and the Destined One, but not everyone is going to make that distinction, I understand. I've got room in my collection for both, but if I had to pick, seeing as though you can't even really buy the figure on the right, it has to be the figure on the left by default. Plus the outfit is more interesting and you get more accessories. As you can see, they are very close to being the same exact height. It's probably the neck connector that's giving the figure on the left a little bit of a height boost. Going over articulation, with this not being final, I'll be gentle. But I still want to give you a pretty good idea of what he can do, so I'll attempt to strike a balance. Oh, no headdress, because can you imagine? The head tails, they'd be getting in our way constantly. Dial in the pose first, then install the headdress. Starting off with the head sculpt, it's on a double ball peg and a cylindrical neck connector, which means it's height adjustable for a little bit more range if you need it. Looking forward to there, up to there, plenty of range for a jumping, fighting, or perching on the staff pose, swivel, and tons of pivot side to side. Shoulder pads are on Velcro and they're attached underneath his arms with these strings going up to there. Surprisingly more range than I was expecting given the size of these pieces. Forward and back on soft ratchets. There's a butterfly joint at the shoulder that hinges up and down. Swivel at the bicep. Double bend at the elbow going just past 90, but it springs back down a touch. For the wrist peg, it's a good old-fashioned hinge and swivel. The torso, I'm not expecting much here. Sculpted plastic armor, multiple layers and plates stacked on top of one another, crunching forward to there. It's about what I expected, really. Going back to there, a little bit of swivel, maybe, and a touch of pivot. His legs go forward to there as the skirt splits, allowing for that range. Going out to there. Swivel at the upper thigh. Ratcheted double bend at the knee, going the full way. The feet are on double ball pegs, I think. They move like double ball pegs, so that's what I'm going to run with. And this armor plate is on a hinge, so that gets out of the way. Feet go forward to there, going down to there. We get swivel and ankle tilt. Wrapping up on the pre-production sample version of Wukong in his Great Sage armor by INART. It's awesome. But, because it's not a final production piece, I don't want to go too in-depth on material choices and even detail, because from them sending me this one to posting online about Wukong, they've updated the prototype. Mine is no longer even representative of the detail on the current prototype. So, with that in mind, is this any good? 110%. This thing, even as it stands right now, this version they sent me, I would have been happy with it. But they're continuously making improvements and tweaking things, and that's why we love INART. They consider every little detail. I've ranted and raved the entire video about how good this thing is. You can tell by now that I am well and truly enamored. I don't need to do that any further because you can see it. You can see all of the detail. You've experienced it along with me. One of their best figures to date. Detail, sculpt work, accessories, proportions, presence. They're experimenting with crotch grabbers now. But they're optional, you don't have to use them. They're firing on all cylinders, and I cannot wait to not only get the final production version of this, but see what else they're planning on making from this game. Because you don't grab the Wukong license if you're only making 2 figures from the game, one of which is locked behind an exclusivity wall as part of the collector's edition version of that game. So at the end of the video, I think we can all agree that this figure already is shaping up to be a masterpiece. Now, if you're looking to pre-order Wukong in his Great Sage armor set, I've popped a link to INART's website in the description, along with the discount code JUSTIN for 5% off your order. It's an affiliate link, but any commission earned will be reinvested back into the channel and put towards making new content. If you're heading down to the description, why not hit that subscribe, bell notification icon, and join button if you like the sound of seeing your name in the end credits of my reviews. Like, comment, and subscribe. We'll catch you in the next video.